Welcome to Fishing Without Bait. Whether you've got here by accident or on purpose, you've landed in our universe. Fishing Without Bait is a program and a lifestyle about living life without definitive expectations, either imposed on ourselves or by others. There's no admission fee, only the honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness to try. We're not looking to help people find themselves. We're helping people create their lives and explode into their lives through full impact mindfulness. I'm Jim Ellermeyer. I'm a behavioral health therapist, and as promised for faithful followers of the show, we have an eclectic roster of guests, and we were introduced to this particular guest by our good friends John and Rachel at the Jagoff podcast, one of the most popular podcasts in Pittsburgh. And today we'd like to welcome Mr. Vincenzo Borelli. Vinny, welcome aboard.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Honored.
And as most of our listeners know, what we like to do is we like to highlight recovery stories. People always say, "Oh, gee, if I had your type of life, I'd be good too." But most people think that they're overnight successes. That's not at all. Have you ever heard the term, "I'm a 20-year overnight success"?
Not at all.
So could you tell us a little bit about what was behind writing your book? And could you give us the title of it, Vinny?
Sure. The title is Personal Prosperity Blueprint. And the background really behind it was the pain that I went through as a child. And, it was so long ago. It was back in 86 when I lost my sister. And that was kind of the foundation, the roots of really writing this book. And I started with just writing stuff on paper. And I found that it kept getting more and more. Every time I'd go through something in my life, I'd write something else down. And finally, 30 years later, it came to someone seeing it and saying, you have a good story here. Maybe you should share it and help others go through the grieving process. Like you said, the recovery process of pain and the trials and tribulations of growing up in inner city Pittsburgh. And so with that, there goes a lot. And so that was really the foundation of it that got me started.
So you didn't grow up with the house and the white picket fence and the two dogs and everything's shiny and bright and rainbows and butterflies floating around. You were the child of Italian immigrants.
That's correct. Yes, my father came from Italy, from Calabria, and my mother was born here, but also first generation. And yeah, just grew up with actually English as a second language, having to learn how to speak proper English, going to the the short bus, the dummy van, speech therapy, or whatever they called it back then. But yeah, just a very inner city. Got bullied as a kid. My father, probably today would be in prison for the the discipline that we got. We got true beatings with a belt that a lot of people today don't have, and nor should they. But yeah, it was really just not a really horrible life, but very rough growing up. And most of the kids in Bloomfield, in Garfield, Lawrenceville, in the inner city had the same.
So you grew up in a Italian-speaking household, and there you were trying to get acculturized into American culture. And I would probably suspect that your father had little understanding, or I don't know how much interest he had in.
Yeah, he had none, actually. And that's why I got into martial arts. And I played sports as a kid. I don't think my father came to one game, not one football game, not one hockey game, not one baseball game. We had to play everything back then, especially growing up in the Catholic school system. You played everything, even if you stunk at that sport. So I went into martial arts, and yeah, it wasn't real supportive. My father was, you go to work. That's what you do. You don't play sports. You just go to work.
So with your father, I would probably suspect that his work ethic and his main goal in his life was to support his family.
Yes, it was. He was to support his family, and coming over from Italy. Although he didn't come over on the boat, he didn't land in Ellis Island. He came over with a briefcase, and everything he thought maybe he would need coming to America was in that. I say briefcase, but it was a really small luggage, and so yeah, it was. That's really all he thought of, is working to make food, put food on our table, and trying to keep my sister, who was very ill growing up, keep her alive.
Tell us about your mother, Vinny.
Sure. Mother was the same, really hardworking, old Italian, first generation, so very tough, again, bilingual as well. But she worked all her life, a very devout religious person who, of course, Catholic in our community, but very, she was an angel. Everyone who meets my mother, Josephine, says, your mother was an angel. And still is. So she was very, she was rough and tough when she needed to be, but she was the soft one of the family.
You were talked about being timid when you were younger.
Very timid. And my father, If I'd come home with a black eye, I got another little beating from him.
Mm.
Not that he knew how to fight, but they didn't take anything. And the term "dago" is day goers. They went day by day going for work, so they were put through hell and back.
I never knew that, Vinny.
Yeah,
I knew it was a slur. My grandfather's from Italy, and my mother always thought that was the worst thing a human being could say.
yeah. And for them, it's a very, very nasty word. My father doesn't understand a lot, but if you call him that, even at 88, he'll swing his cane at you because they did go day by day going for work. So that is a real slap to them.
So tell us about being bullied in a neighborhood like Bloomfield. For those of you who don't know, it was a blue collar neighborhood here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, just it was really, I don't know what reason they had, just felt that every day after school would get chased, and I was always with my sister. And then after she passed away, instead of having some empathy, sympathy, compassion, whatever you want to call it, they would say, "Well, now your big sister's not here to stand up for you." And so that was really a wow factor for me, and very shocking that I thought, well, at least they'd have some sympathy, and it just didn't exist.
So tell us about Gina. There's always moments in people's lives. There's moments that stand out that cause a change in people's life. They're epiphany moments, metamorphosis type of moments. So I want to hear all about Gina.
Sure. So she was born with a congenital heart disease, so she had one valve and wasn't even supposed to live. My mother prayed and prayed that she would survive, and she did in fact survive till she was 7. Then had to get a valve, an artificial valve put in. And back then, God, that was a major, major procedure. Today it's like outpatient, it's like an oil change. But so back then she did successfully come out of that surgery, the artificial valve replacement. But then as her heart grew, which was a miracle that she even lived that long, she lived till 17, 18 and needed to get another valve put in. And she went through the procedure, but just didn't make it out. The procedure itself was successful, just everything else was shutting down. So at that point, they had to make a decision. There was nothing else they could do. So they had to pull the plug, but there was just nothing else they could do to keep her alive.
And she passed in the hospital.
And she passed, yep, in 1986.
You talked extensively about her being a singer, about playing the piano, and that she was your best friend.
She was. And, and there's different relationships. I'm sure everyone has a sibling that they're best friends with. Mine just was a little bit more, I guess, intimate because I watched her go through hospital visits, and her fingers, her lips were always purple because of circulation and hospital visits. But she started singing at a young age, made a CD, so we have a great memory of her that we could play, sang at weddings, funerals, you name it, at the church. So it was really hard to let go of my best friend. And then at the end, in 86, we were just supposed to take her on a ambulance visit, which didn't understand. Now I do, of course, in retrospect. But we were tying her shoes, and they said, "We have to bring your sister Gina to the hospital." My mother and father kind of hiding it, that it was more serious than it was. And that was the last time I saw her. So I had a conversation. Never got closure, never got to say goodbye, which is part of the, the recovery process that took me years and years to get over that. And then we thought, well, she sang in a church, didn't sin, was such a good person. Well, that didn't matter. Her time was called. Her ticket was pulled.
Well, quite often, Vinny, as everyone knows out there, I'm a behavioral health therapist, and I help people figure out what's important, Vinny. There's very, very simple things that I do. I usually tell people that we're spiritual beings and we happen to be having a human experience. And it's this enmeshment in this human experience that doodles our life up, and that life's absurd. And once they grasp all those three concepts, our work will be done. So I'd often ask people, I say, who do you trust so much in this world that if they said fall, I'll catch you, and you'd fall without hesitation because that's how much you trust them? Or I asked them, I said, if everything were taken away from you, who'd be standing with you at the end, who would never leave you? And my guess, it would have been Gina.
Absolutely. 100%.
Wasn't it beautiful that you have memories?
It is. And I still, now that all these years getting through the anger and the pain, my recovery was, I know that I have an angel, and meeting or cheating death, I should say, multiple times, as you alluded to earlier, that I know for a fact that I have someone looking on my shoulder. So yeah, it is great to have those memories. Some people don't have that.
Well, we go through life. We can go to Bloomfield. We can go to Lawrenceville. We can go to Cancun. We can go to the waterfront. We can go to New York City. But the only thing we carry throughout our lives, the only thing we bring back is memories, Vinny.
That's right.
We carry memories with us, and I imagine you have many wonderful memories of
I
Gina.
do. I do. Very blessed.
And so she's a significant person in your life. If we were doing timeline therapy, we'd be talking a lot about Gina. However, you began to doubt. It says you began to doubt. And how could this happen?
Right. I did. And that's where I became bitter. I just didn't understand. Back then my parents were just trying to get over losing their first child, and I'm the only one left. And my mother was, medicated to get through the pain. My father went to drinking more alcohol and hasn't stopped since. And he's, like we talked about, still alive at 88. So that kept him alive. But yeah, so I started really getting bitter and start taking these wrong paths and making wrong choices only because of the anger. Not that I was a bad person, but it brought out that pain, brought out the anger and angst, and I wanted to hurt others.
Pain and anger. Sometimes I talk about males being emotionally constipated, and one of the only emotions that some males, when they're brought up in man school, are allowed to feel is anger.
Right. True. And it just took a long time, but yeah, that really that put me over the edge. And then I started seeing that, started finding myself spiritually, and start thinking about my mother. And am I gonna make the wrong choices and go to jail? Am I gonna make the wrong choices and she's gonna bury me? Or am I gonna resort to, substance abuse, which was always there? And I finally I had a awakening and woke up and said, "There's more to life."
Your mother must have had some heartaches.
Yes, she has. Yes, I put her through a lot, but then I'm her number one now, and she lives for me.
Well, that's what we do in this world. What we do is we make living amends. Okay. My mother was the last friend I had in the world, and she wasn't very happy with me. But the only thing that I could do is make living amends, and I'm sure you're doing that with your mother. Lovely, wants to see you do well. When you're happy, she's happy,
Absolutely, yes, for sure.
and that makes her. So when we're dealing with the Creator, the divine, why does God do this? Why is God having all these children starve? God's not starving those children. We are.
Right.
It's human beings. So I was at a rehab one time, Vinny. You can feel free to steal any of this stuff I've stolen now. I haven't had an original thought in years. And I was sitting there, and there was this young lady, and she was so angry. I was getting a heat wave. I was getting a tan from their anger. And I said, "Man," I said, "I haven't seen anybody this angry in a while." And she told me that her 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 husband was on trial for murdering their 2-year-old son. And she says, "I'm so angry with God." And, naturally I was talking about spirituality and 12-step work. And she says, "I hate God. It did nothing." And I suggested to her, I said, "You know what?" I said, "Perhaps God doesn't take, God receives." And when we look at things from a different perspective, and I think that's what your whole book's talking about, you're looking at it from another perspective.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
So
100%.
how did you decide to stop and say, "Hey, wait a minute, I have the lenses in my glasses reversed"?
Right. I just, again, it really took a lot to wake up and realize I'm going down the wrong path. I'm not making the right decisions. What am I doing? Why am I doing this? And if I would have stayed on the path I was on, I probably would have again been in a bad place. And bad place meaning, you know, prison, rehab center, something not, productive and prosperous, as I say. So it's just a really awakening, and I found out that God put me here for a reason. And what is that reason? It's certainly not to do what I'm doing.
Well, one of the quotes that you had in here, and I had it starred, Vinny, it says, "Still in all the fights I was in, could never compete with the fight my sister had for her life."
Correct. A lot of being in a full contact sport, everyone thought, well, that's such a big deal. Well, it's not. And I always refer to my sister's battle, watching her on different machines, just the heart and lung machine alone, to a respirator. And then even today, I'm in the medical field seeing, I go back to people complaining about, and the energy behind this is that you complain about not having the time or whatever to pay your cell phone bill, but come with me to Children's Hospital and see the 7-year-old fighting for her life that doesn't have a chance or a choice. You do. And I know you agree with that. We have a choice, and some people don't make the right ones, but that battle, that fight, those kids and my sister had a way harder fight than any full contact fight that I ever had.
Sounds like your sister had tremendous courage.
Absolutely. She did. Yeah, she was a warrior.
Man, she could be a hero.
Yes.
Absolutely. So, Vinny, you start to talk about the why questions. Why do we do this? Why do we begin with? And you talk about making decisions and the standards you set for yourself.
Right. And the reason why I do that is because I think, there's a lot of guys out there that are much more experienced and avid public speakers, avid motivational and inspirational speakers that they start with why. And so when I start realizing that and start putting that and pushing that on people that I talk to, a lot of people don't know why they do what they do. And if you do, it really, or if you don't, and you ask yourself that question, then you do, it changes your perspective on, what the hell are you doing with your day? Like your 24 hours. And I put that in the book and the 4 pillars I created in there. Like you got to have a why. And a lot of people don't. A lot of the friends that are going through stuff right now that I talked to even over the weekend have these issues and have these problems, but they don't know why they're in the situation and why they want to get out of it even. But they stay in it, complacent.
Well, acceptance is always the prelude to change, always. And I love when you started to talk about people having regrets. I love people that they didn't pursue in their lives, the regrets. Most people live their life in regret, Vinny.
Yeah, and I'm learning that more and more, and that's one of the things that I found in my studies from some of the people that I train under and study under that they say that people at the end of their day, at their last breath on their deathbed, they don't say they regret doing certain things. They regret what they didn't do. Like they say, the richest place in the world is the grave because there people die with dreams and goals and desires that they never pursued.
There's no prize for being the richest person in a cemetery, Vinny.
That's right.
I've often thought that my best cemetery would be at the top of every tombstone. The epitaph would be "No regrets."
That would be wonderful.
Wouldn't it be wonderful?
Absolutely.
That's what we always ask people. Will you regret it if you don't do this? And I always ask people, what are you waiting for?
Right. That's the thing. People think they're guaranteed tomorrow, and I always say that. And it's very redundant in my talks. It's not a dress rehearsal. You're not guaranteed tomorrow. So, like, well, I'll get to that. Well, how do you know that you're going to get there? I have a friend right now that has a date and an age when he's going to start living his life. I know. It is comical. And I'm like, what the? Wait a second. What? What do you mean? Why?
I'm not
What if you-
laughing at your friend. I'm laughing at the concept.
Yeah, the concept is absurd. And I'm like, what are you waiting for and why? What if you don't make it to next week? Or what if you don't make it to even the next birthday before that particular number? And so, but it doesn't, people, if you're not receptive, I can't push you. I can only give you what I think, in my opinion, and the millionaires that I've studied under that aren't happy. Then there's the ones that are. There's the people that have no money and that are more happy than the billionaire. So it's about just living and doing what makes you happy. But what is that makes you happy?
Well, there's money billionaires and there's money millionaires. There are no time millionaires.
That's right.
There are no time billionaires. And quite often, Vinny, on this show, we talk about time traveling a lot. People have frequent flyer miles to the past and the future, brief layovers in the present. That's what we're always talking about. Where are you at? I'm right here. It's right now. What's right in front of you?
I love it. I love that. And that, the thing is too, like you said with time, I always hear that, well, I got to make time for that. Well, that's absurd because you're not going to make time. You have to find that time. Again, like we talked about, the 24 hours are the 24 hours. You have the same ones as I have, that the beggar does, that the billionaire does. So you can't make time. You have to find time.
It all involves choices, Vinny, and not being afraid to fail.
Right. That's right. And I just spoke about that earlier. It's on the, my Make It Happen Monday that I spoke about. It's about the fear of change and the fear of failure. People are afraid to fail, but yet if you don't fail, then you haven't done anything really to find out how you can get through that challenge.
Well, Thomas Edison was once asked by an investigative reporter, and they had investigative reporters even then that tried to jab Edison to get some type of a statement out of him to irritate him. And they asked, he was doing the light bulb, the filament thing, and I guess they tried over 1,000 of them. And the reporter said, "Tell me, Mr. Edison, how does it feel to have failed over 1,000 times?" And he says, "I never failed." He said, "I found 1,000 things that didn't work."
Yeah, I love that. That's true, 100%. I mean, just think about if people are afraid to make one or two choices for fear of failure. Well, usually on the other side of failure, I always say that's a developmental stepping stone. I've had certain businesses that I failed at, but I learned from them, and I got buddies that haven't ever tried it. So I said, well, maybe you would have succeeded, but guess what? You already lost because you didn't try.
There's a quote by George Adair that says, everything that you want is on the other side of fear. Fear is the most fundamental emotion we feel.
I love that. I agree 100%.
Absolutely. But what it takes to deal with fear is courage.
Right.
I've never met anybody that was fearless, Vinny.
True. It's true, but you have to take that step, and like you said, if you don't have the courage and the perseverance to want to get through it, you'll never know you'll never know if you can be phenomenal. You always stay at a mediocrity, or just a mediocre life.
We'll be back next week with our continuing conversation with entrepreneur and motivational speaker Vinnie Borelli, who can be contacted at www.vinnieborelli.com. And as always, as everyone expects, our free prescription, fruits, nuts, and vegetables. Unplug your television and take up fishing. And for a truly mindful experience, we suggest that you fish without bait. My friends, do a kindness for yourself. Do a kindness for another. Forgive yourself and forgive another. Till all are free, none are free. Namaste.
Please check out our website at fishingwithoutbait.com, where you can listen to the show, comment on our discussions, and find out where you can subscribe to our podcast. If you're interested in flying the colors of Fishing Without Bait, click the shop icon on our website. We have clothing, mugs, cell phone cases, and so much more. Show the world that you fish without bait. This show is a member of the Sorgatron Media Podcast Network. Find out more at sorgatronmedia.com.